Welcome to the Caravan Show, where we discuss all things caravans. That's right, everything you need to know about caravans, from weight, towing, maintenance, appliances, renovations, buying a caravan, repairs, destinations and reviews. We'll also chat with some Aussie legends, manufacturers, suppliers and of course, people who love caravans. Take it away, Roy.
G'day everyone, it's Roy here from the Caravan Show and Podcast, and I have with me today Mayor Sam Hearn, who is the Mayor of the Mornington Peninsula Shire. G'day Sam, how you doing?
Yeah, not too bad today, Roy.
You're in that seat actually relatively new, is that correct?
Yeah, so I've been the mayor since last year, so yeah, sort of over the last 12 months or so period. So, and I've been serving as a councillor down here since 2016.
Are you a local man?
Yeah, so I live up the sort of northern end of the Mornington Peninsula in the township of Mornington itself, and I've been living here since I was 12, 13 years old, and I'm now just in my early 30s. So
I was
you
going
can
to
do
say,
the maths on that, I guess.
Yeah, I think you're one of the youngest mayors we've had on the show. So
yeah, I'm the youngest mayor we've ever had in our area. So yeah, probably amongst the younger in the state as well. So,
are you a local businessman, or have you really just taken this particular path?
My background's in a range of different things. I have been involved in starting up some local small business in hospitality, but my main kind of area of work, and that I've spent a lot of time doing both locally and nationally, is kind of in not-for-profit community development. So working in particular with younger people or families, kind of doing it tough and kind of managing and leading organisations that are working in that space. And that's led me to be really involved in my own local community and doing a whole range of things, which, you know, then ended up with a bunch of local people kind of asking me to run for council and been doing that for 4 years now as well. So a mix of different things, I guess.
So whereabouts is the Morning Peninsula?
Yeah, so we're to the southeast, I guess, of Melbourne. If you look at the Port Phillip Bay, we're kind of the almost Italy-shaped boot on the kind of right-hand side of the bay, and we're the first shire rather than city local government area. So we're the kind of first area when you're travelling around to the southeast along the coastline, where you exit the kind of formal Greater Melbourne area and enter into the first kind of, I guess, country shire. That being said, we're kind of really diverse. The top end of the shire still feels like the fringes of the city in some ways, and then the further south you go and the further inland you go, the more kind of rural and country it kind of feels. So it's a really kind of diverse landscape across our kind of area.
So landmass wise, you're about what sort of size?
That's a good question. I couldn't tell you our kind of square area off the top of my head, but it's a kind of substantial kind of area. It sort of takes you an hour to drive from the top to the bottom end of the shire, and a good half an hour across. So it's around 700 or so square kilometres.
Wow. Okay. And population-wise, do you know what sort of population you have?
Yeah, so we've got about, it all depends on the time of year, and that'll make sense if you come visit us and see where we are and what the area's like. But we have a kind of constant residential population around 170,000 people, but that can swell all the way up to about 250,000 people across the summer months, because there's so many people from the kind of Greater Melbourne area who have holiday homes down here, and then we have so much camping and caravanning down here across the summer months. So we can have an extra 60 to 70,000 people down here across those 3 or 4 months of good weather that we get. So, yeah.
So what sort of industry do you have? Do you have manufacturing industry, or is it agricultural? What sort of...
It's a real range of stuff. We have a really strong agricultural industry that kind of generates billions of dollars and is part of the food bowl for Melbourne. A lot of that's high-end kind of agriculture. very Epicurean, with lots of restaurants down here that are great, but we also supply to a lot of restaurants up in Melbourne City that kind of do really kind of high-end food. Lots of wine in that kind of space, alongside Yarra Valley, where probably the kind of main kind of key areas of Victoria's wine industry, and then a lot of tourism and hospitality. We do have some kind of historic heavy industries on the Western Port side around kind of Hastings area, with BHP and the like being based there. Obviously, that's kind of declined over the last number of decades, sadly. But we're working at the moment, just as we're speaking, in the middle of this coronavirus recovery phase, to open up some new industrial uses around the historic Port of Hastings area. So, real mix. A fair bit of kind of medical stuff that we do down here as well, with connections to Monash University and medical sort of stuff too. So, quite a diverse mix.
So being a peninsula, you've really got 3 surrounding water bases, and then you've got a land component sort of at the north end of the peninsula. Is that about right?
Yeah. So, I guess for a kind of relatively small section, especially when you compare it to the size of Australia, we have an incredibly diverse landscape, both coastline and hinterland. Because you're right, we've got the kind of Port Phillip, very, quieter bay kind of coastline. We've got the wild kind of stormy Bass Coast, open ocean kind of coastline on our back beaches, from Portsea through to Cape Schanck. And then we have the Western Port side, which is more open to Bass Strait than Port Phillip is, and also kind of looks out onto the Phillip Island area, and that, I guess, is in between. You still kind of get on the surface, so you get good surf through there as well as through the kind of Bass Strait area. And then, our coastline follows that. You've got some very rocky and wild kind of coastline, some really big cliffs, some very kind of fairly, especially for Victoria, kind of more untouched and unpopulated kind of areas on the Western Port side, and then that kind of, very kind of active and populated Port Phillip side. So it's a real mix of different spaces and environments.
Mm. So, Sam, how well do you cater for us caravanners? How many caravan parks in your area?
Dozens and dozens of caravan parks that are privately operated right around the peninsula, and then we directly operate as the Shire ourselves, extensive camping and caravan sites right along the Port Phillip side of the bay, so more than 1,000 different sites that stretch from Sorrento all the way up to Macrae, and they're really kind of, I guess they're quite famous in Victoria because there's families that have been kind of going down and camping in the same site or caravanning in the same site for decades. But they're kind of open and available, and a real kind of feature of the kind of camping and caravanning offering we give. I guess you kind of literally have $1 million waterfront place you can have your caravan, because you're literally camping on the foreshore at Port Phillip Bay. And then on the other side, on the Western Port side, a slightly less well-known but still fantastic foreshore caravan and camping areas in areas like Point Leo and Shoreham that are managed by independent committees of management, but they likewise are right on the foreshore in the Western Port area, and kind of offer a different style. And then you've got, like I said, dozens of privately owned and operated caravan parks that are scattered through townships. Some of those are in more central kind of locations, a bit out of the town. So there's basically any type of caravan park you can think of, or kind of camping area you can think of, we've got it down here. So,
do you cater for free camping?
There's not too much free camping, which is usually the case with an area that's both close to a bigger city and the coast. There are a few free camping sites on some of our walking trails through the middle of the peninsula. You wouldn't get a caravan onto those, unfortunately, because they tend to be the ones that you kind of you could park nearby and get your tent and stuff out, but they're kind of on the trails. But pretty much all of the other camping's paid camping. Although the Shire sites that we operate, particularly on off-peak, are really quite affordable rates compared to what you'd be paying at a private caravan park in the broader area. So, yeah.
But given the fact that there's so many caravan parks here, obviously caravanners play a fairly important part in your local industry and in your local economy, rather, and all the provisions that are required are going to be there for them. So you've got caravan repairers, car repairers, all that sort of stuff well catered for, I assume.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, because we are, spread out, but a relatively higher populated area and closer to Melbourne, there's all the kind of different things you'd need very available to people, heaps of different local service providers of those kind of things for your car or your caravan. Yeah, that kind of stuff's all here. And because we're such a popular kind of tourism location, both statewide for people in our state, other Victorians, and also kind of national travellers, that we've got a long kind of history and experience in providing for all those different needs.
Speaking of history, Sam, what is the history of the peninsula there?
So we're kind of, historically, the very first, kind of going back, obviously, before European settlement, thousands of years, the local people were the Bunurong people, which kind of stretch from our area all the way across to Wilson's Promontory, which is another beautiful part of Victoria. And then in terms of the kind of European colonisation of Australia and settlement, Sorrento was actually the very first area kind of where there was a European settlement, albeit they gave up and kind of went back to Tasmania after a few years of kind of attempting to get that up. But the history, once Melbourne was starting to be settled and people were coming down here, was really around, farming and cattle runs through most of the peninsula that was started up, a couple of key kind of coastal fishing village type things, and then from very early on, the Sorrento and Portsea area grew into a summer holiday and holiday destination for Melbourne. So there was some big paddle steamers that kind of left Melbourne and took people down to holiday homes and hotels in Mornington, in kind of Sorrento and Portsea, and so then they kind of built up from there. Long kind of farming history and farming townships, and then as Melbourne itself has grown, the population, I guess, of the peninsula really grew significantly from the probably early 1990s, late 1980s through to the mid to late 2000s. I guess there's a kind of big 20-year period of growth, and then we've kind of grown sort of steadily since then, but nowhere near as much as some of the kind of main kind of growth corridors of Melbourne. And that's been a big focus for our area in terms of maintaining the unique character and the real kind of natural beauty and assets of the peninsula for our state, and also the agricultural kind of focus of needing to kind of keep that kind of farmland and that land available for agricultural and environmental values. So, it's definitely there's all sorts of different stories and different kind of historical places and towns and houses and that kind of stuff right through the peninsula, because the history of it's linked there alongside the history of Melbourne itself.
So is there still an Indigenous influence in the area?
So we have in more recent times. There's been an Aboriginal kind of traditional owner being recognised in the Bunurong Land Council and so there's still existing and continuing leadership from First Peoples in our community. And then, like lots of areas in Australia, we've got a large, our kind of Aboriginal community on the peninsula is double the Victorian state average. So I've got a large Aboriginal community with people from all different kind of heritages from around Australia. And so we've got a number of kind of local gathering places and Aboriginal kind of corporations and the like that do amazing stuff in our community and for our community. And that's a real growing thing. I think there's been some amazing, Aboriginal businesses start up in recent times that offer kind of cultural history and heritage walks, environmental walks through some of our landscapes, sharing some of the stories and also, educating and teaching how they lived off the land and the way their kind of society and way of life worked on the peninsula for thousands of years. So, there's some real kind of richness, both continuing but even emerging more recently in telling those stories and allowing the rest of us who don't share that heritage to benefit from and really, receive from their kind of knowledge and connection to the land down here, which is fantastic.
So when our caravanning community arrived down on the Mornington Peninsula, there's plenty of things to see and do. So we'd like to talk a little bit about some of those things, if I may. I think one of the most popular things, as I understand, is the hot springs. So can you tell us about the hot springs?
Yeah, the Peninsula Hot Springs is I guess relatively recent as a business, but it's obviously really kind of taken off and has an amazing reputation, which is well deserved because of just kind of how spectacular it is as a location. So it's down out the back of Rye, so in the kind of hinterland area towards the southern end of the peninsula, and it was founded sort of from the late 90s. In 1997, a couple of brothers down here, after seeing the hot springs in Japan, kind of came back and did a bunch of research and started a slow journey of kind of finding tapping into the kind of natural hot springs down here and getting all the relevant permits and everything they needed, and then finally opening up what is just an amazing experience both for our local community but anyone who comes down here, of all these hot spring baths that are nestled into the natural landscape with a whole bunch of native vegetation around it and just this real atmosphere of serenity and tranquility, and it's fantastic, especially in winter, to go down there when the temperatures down here in Victoria are quite chilly, and kind of have that experience of just the steam rising off these springs in the middle of the bush with the stars up above you, and being very, very warm to your bones in the middle of a very cold kind of time of the year. So it's definitely something, if you're going to come down, you need to do it. Yeah. It's definitely on the must-do list if you're coming to the peninsula.
Yes, I mean, I remember the Hepburn Springs, but it's nothing like what you're describing. So you've got lots of other things. So you've got the Ashcombe Maze. So if I really want to mess with my head, I can go and get myself lost in a maze in the Mornington Peninsula. I didn't know about that one either.
Yeah, so that's been there for quite a while, that one, and it's kind of a really great one. It kind of provides a bit of that, I guess, that old school, if you like, English kind of maze garden combined with newer attractions they update, and then kind of Australian bush sort of elements as well. It's got a whole range of different things there on offer. And then we've got another maze as well on the top of Arthur's Seat, and another one down in Borneo. So there's a couple of different mazes you can kind of check out and compare, and all of them are a bit different but offer some great kind of entertainment. So there's definitely a range of those kind of activities which, I've got a couple of young kids. They love doing those sort of things. But I think, mazes hold an appeal to all ages, I think.
Tell me about Arthur's Seat. I keep hearing this name Arthur's Seat, and every time I hear Arthur's Seat, I've got visions of a throne somewhere. So what is actual Arthur's Seat about?
Well, there is an old metal seat on top of it that kind of fits it, but Arthur's Seat is kind of the highest point on the peninsula. So I guess it's probably appropriate that it's not called a mountain or anything quite that grand, because it's definitely not that high in comparison to other places around the state or the country. But it definitely within the view line of the peninsula, it's the dominating kind of natural feature, and it kind of rises up in the centre of the peninsula with a ridge line that continues down the back, and on top of it are a number of really stunning lookouts that look out both south down the peninsula and across the bay out into the Bass Strait, and then north back up towards Melbourne and towards the Dandenongs. And it's a whole kind of sort of state park and national parkland area across the top, with some amazing gardens. There's what's called the Sea Winds Gardens right on top, and there's also the kind of famous chairlift, which is now been rebuilt with gondolas that kind of you can choose to take that kind of scenic view travelling up the face of Arthur's Seat. So to be honest, I'm not 100% sure where the name Arthur's Seat comes from. I think it kind of comes from that kind of early settlement, someone comparing it with some place back in the UK or something like that. So
yeah, a lot of that happened, of course, didn't it? I've also been told, I've got to ask you, what this place called Quarantine Station's all about.
Yeah, so that's one of those kind of significant historical kind of places on the peninsula that we were talking about earlier. So Quarantine Station and the whole kind of precinct is down there at Point Nepean on the very tip of the peninsula. And so that was set up early in Victoria's history, obviously as a place to quarantine travellers, and also there's some forts, some pretty extensive old forts and gun emplacements around there. So the Quarantine Station itself was opened in the 1850s and is the second oldest kind of intact quarantine station in the whole country. And it operated all the way through till late in the 20th century. And then the forts down there are historic as well, because they were the first places that shots were fired in anger in both the world wars, funnily enough, which is one of those historical quirks that we know down here, but probably aren't too widely known. So they're worth checking those out, and you can walk and ride your bike all the way through that, and it's a really stunning natural landscape as well, because as the peninsula literally comes down to a narrow point, you kind of are walking along this path where you've got cliffs and the ocean, the bay and the Bass Strait on either side of you, as you walk down to the quarantine stations and the forts at the end of Point Nepean.
So on that peninsula area there, you've got a lot of well-known towns, haven't you? I mean, you've mentioned a couple. You mentioned Rye, but there's a whole heap of them, isn't there?
Yeah, so the biggest towns are all kind of spread kind of sequentially down Port Phillip. So, Mornington at the top end is a township of around 40 to 50,000 people between it and the couple of townships that are to its north and south. Then you've got Rosebud as the kind of big township kind of halfway down the peninsula on the Port Phillip Bay, and again that's another 30, 40,000 people kind of around that Rosebud area, and then it continues down to Rye and Sorrento as two bigger town centres on the southern end of the peninsula. And then on the Western Port side, Hastings is the biggest township with around 10,000, 12,000 people and Balnarring a bit smaller further down on the western port coastline. And then you've got a lot of townships scattered between those and in the hinterland area. So all up, we've actually got 42 distinct townships on the Mornington Peninsula, ranging in size from Mornington as the biggest with 40,000 or so people, all the way down to those that kind of have a couple of hundred people, if that, in some of those kind of historic kind of rural township areas, if you like. So, yeah, it's quite a mix.
Yeah, and of course each of those towns have got their own special uniqueness, things to do, things to see inside each and every one of them. And so a visit to the Mornington Peninsula could actually be, best described as a long stay rather than a quick visit, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. We often have people, and this is the way we structure our camping on our own foreshore, people who come down and base themselves down here for 2 or 3 months over the summer, and kind of then really make the most of checking out all that we've got to offer and all of the different experiences around there. And I guess that it's sort of testament to what the role we play, that people from Melbourne just, the default is to come down the peninsula for long weekends or holidays, and there's always new things to do and always kind of plenty on offer because of all the different townships and all the different parts of the peninsula, all of the different amazing kind of restaurants and cafes and wineries, all the different kind of activities on offer.
Tell us some about these cafes and wineries and things, Sam. Just dig a little deeper into that. And do you actually produce wine on the peninsula?
Yeah, so we produce some of Australia's best wines on the peninsula, with some really kind of historic wineries down here, and I guess Melbourne more broadly, in Victoria, we like to think that we're right up there, if not leading the country in terms of our kind of food and wine culture and that kind of thing. So that kind of translates into the Mornington Peninsula really being seen as the next kind of focus, I guess, historically, of restaurateurs from the city kind of wanting to come down and really provide kind of nation-leading and even kind of world-leading experiences. And then some amazing, recent developments. The Point Leo estate comes to mind as one where you've had a lot of money invested in combining a winery with a kind of amazing restaurant experience with a full sculpture park and an outdoor art gallery experience. So, yeah, there's all sorts of different things on offer across our kind of wineries down here that are well worth checking out if that's your scene.
Yeah, and then you mentioned art there, of course, and that was going to be my next question. How well represented are you with the arts and craft? I mean, do you have markets where people can go to see, or have you got special centres for your arts and crafts?
Yeah, there's a whole range of different things in that space. We do have regular markets in some of the main streets of our townships. Mornington has a Wednesday Main Street market that's particularly well known, but there's farmers markets and other markets right across the peninsula all the time. Some of those have more of a focus on kind of food, others are more kind of art and craft based, but there's all sorts of things there. The Shire itself has a regional gallery that we've just celebrated this year, our 50th anniversary for our regional gallery, and that houses some amazing art collected from the peninsula and also around the country. And there's a history with the peninsula of being home historically to some of the nation's leading artists who kind of came down here retreating away from the city of Melbourne and did some amazing art while they were down here, that we're privileged to kind of hold that in our collections. And in current day, there's a lot of artists and art studios that are based through the hinterland areas of Red Hill and other places like that, where the creative community really love kind of basing themselves out on the peninsula in some of the quieter areas of the peninsula. And there's a lot of those studios and galleries that offer lessons and tutoring and a whole bunch of that kind of stuff as well. So it's definitely an experience we have on offer down here for people that are keen to get involved in arts and culture.
How effective has the peninsula been with all these natural disasters that we've had with, we've had droughts and we've had fires and now, of course, the COVID-19. How have these affected you?
I guess the kind of drought space, thankfully not as badly as much of the country, but still, there has been a challenge for some of our orchards and other kind of growers over the last couple of years. Thankfully, we kind of turned the corner a bit more in more recent times with the rain kind of coming back. We have been working a lot down here and kind of trying to advocate and push the state and federal government to better utilise recycled water. So there's kind of a whole MCG worth of water that gets piped underneath the Mornington Peninsula and outfalls into the Bass Strait every single day, which is the kind of Class A recycled water from Melbourne. And so we're kind of working to get that piped up and used for irrigation, basically to drought-proof our agriculture rather than wasting that. So that's one kind of thing. The most recent bushfire kind of period, thankfully we avoided any impacts directly to the peninsula. The main role we actually played was being the kind of the place of refuge and receiving all the kind of refugees from Malakuta, if you like. So we, in a kind of matter of days, we prepared and kind of received 1,000 of those people who were taken by the Navy off Malakuta. So our main contribution was around that relief and rescue, I guess, response. But we do have enough bushland on the peninsula where it is an issue we have to be mindful of. The benefit of being on the peninsula, though, is that the types of fires we get are a bit different to other parts of Australia in that they can't really build up over kind of hundreds of kilometres and kind of roar through because we're constrained by the water around us. So it's more needing to be aware of those quicker, more focused kind of fires that we're at risk of through the summer in some of our hinterland areas. And then we're definitely in a tough patch this year with obviously the whole kind of nation suffered from coronavirus and the economic impacts of coronavirus. But, we've just kind of had some study, independent commission study that come back to us that's basically said the Mornington Peninsula's right up there at a national and state level. Our economy's suffered 3 times worse impacts than the national kind of average and double what the Victorian state kind of economic impact has been. So we've lost 20% of our kind of economic turnover over this 12-month period and nearly 6,000 jobs. So it's definitely a challenging period of time for our community. And I think a lot of that does make sense because it comes back to us being a place where tourism and hospitality and also kind of, subcontracting tradies that work on not the big kind of city developments, but the smaller kind of housing developments. That's so much of our workforce tied up in those industries. So that's why we've probably suffered more than just about any other region in Victoria economically because of coronavirus. So that'll be a big focus for us down here is kind of, really reopening and trying to really tell the story of the peninsula again and regenerate a bunch of those businesses and industries that have been impacted is obviously a really important focus for us at the moment. So,
yeah, we're harping on this issue of exploring our own backyard. Now's a great time for Victorians to do that. You've still got a COVID-19 problem happening there. There's still lots of restrictions, but there are some relief and there are some places you can go, and the Mornington Peninsula is one of those places that you can go and spend your holiday dollars. These are the guys, as you heard before, when Malakuta needed help, they were there. They put their hands out and said, hey, guys, we're here to help. And, fair's fair. When they need help, well, people should be doing that as well. And there is no better way than helping rather than putting your hand and throwing it into a collection tin to assist. They're not looking for that sort of assistance. They just want you to go and visit and spend some money and have a look at and enjoy all the things they have on offer, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly what it's about. And I think we know right across Australia that it'll probably be coastal townships like ours that are most impacted by, by the coronavirus shutdown and also where those areas have been impacted by bushfires as well. So it's exactly that win-win situation where we're saying to other Australians, come and have a great time and you'll be winning, but also you'll be helping us really get back on our feet by having those kind of dollars spent in our local economy on our local businesses. So, yeah, couldn't have said it better myself.
Sam, it's always pleasing to hear when young folk go up and give it a go, and I'm sure that the peninsula is going to do very well under your mayorship. I don't know if that's the right word, but certainly with you at the helm there. Sam, you've been fantastic coming on here this morning, but I'm going to put you on a little bit of a test here. We can find out a lot about the Mornington Peninsula. We can Google it. We can go online. But usually there's some local knowledge that we always like to ask that is shared. Let us into a couple of your secrets, will you?
Couple of secrets, eh?
Couple of secret spots or things to do that's not generally well known. Yeah,
I mean, funnily enough, there's a lot of things and locations that are kind of well known in the township areas and in hinterland areas. But something that's kind of happened in more recent times is some amazing kind of local businesses that have cropped up in some of our traditionally industrial areas. So some amazing kind of coffee roasteries that offer kind of an attached cafe experience, distilleries, breweries, those kind of things. So, and they do a really good job of both being kind of primary production, but also offering that real kind of experience of, sitting in some well-designed kind of venues and really enjoying yourself. So I guess they're a little bit tucked away often, and locals know about them and love them, but they're a little bit off the beaten track for tourists at times. And the other thing that I'd encourage people to check out is some of the features in the kind of the Western Port area of the peninsula. I mean, they're not a secret in the traditional sense, maybe, but they're definitely under probably visited and not kind of front of mind as much as the kind of Port Phillip beaches or the back beaches are, and some of those areas are my personal favourite to go to because they're little beaches tucked away that haven't been developed, and you've got a lot of natural bushland and some amazing walking trails and experiences through those kind of sections. So those would be two things that I'd point to say the vast bulk of visitors, probably they're not in their go-to things that they do first up, and you can get an experience that, is much more kind of personal with that sense of getting something that the majority of visitors might not be as aware of. So I'd encourage people to check out those kind of two things on the peninsula for sure.
So people arrive on the Mornington Peninsula, they want to get local information. Do you have some information centres?
Yeah, so we've got information centres in all our major townships. We've got information centres in Mornington, Sorrento, Dramana as well. So you can stop in and talk to people. There's some just really lovely volunteers who've been living here for a long time and have heaps of experience and knowledge that kind of man those and give you that combination of pamphlets and things you can take away and check out, but also someone you can have a conversation with and kind of ask those questions around best kept secrets and options of things you can check out when you're down here. So, and as you said, you can kind of jump online and there's a bunch of different websites that ourselves and some of the regional tourism kind of organisations down here put together to keep people up to date as well.
And of course, they can come and smell the lavender gardens too, can't they?
Yeah, that's another great thing to check out for sure.
All right, Sam, again, thank you so much for giving us this time today. It's really appreciated. Our listeners love to hear it. They want to know where to go and what to do, and they want to also know that when they're doing it, they're actually helping out at the same time. So it's been wonderful to hear from you. Thank you.
No, thank you, Roy. Thanks for thinking of us, and thanks for inviting me on the show. Really appreciate the opportunity.
I hope we get to talk again, Sam. Thanks very much, mate.
Yeah, sounds good.